Stephanie Boret. I'm the Director of Donor Relations at the Coastal Land Trust, and I want to welcome you to the 10th annual Flytrap Frolic. This year, the Frolic looks a little different than any other year. Most years, about 750 of you join us in the Stanley Rehder Carnivorous Plant Garden here in Wilmington, North Carolina to explore carnivorous plants. But since we're currently under stay-at-home orders in North Carolina, today we will show you the fascinating world of carnivorous plants virtually. And we have people tuning in from all over today, so we're really glad that you were able to join us today for the Flytrap Frolic. We are so thankful that we're able to continue hosting the Flytrap Frolic and offer it to you in this fun new way. We have some awesome information to share with you, so we hope you found a comfortable place to join us for the next 20 minutes or so. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors who have helped make this event possible, especially our presenting sponsor, Great Outdoor Provision Company, our leadership sponsor, the Orton Foundation, as well as loyal individuals who have supported the Coastal Land Trust and the Frolic for years and years. Including our educational sponsors, the City of Wilmington and the North Carolina Science Festival, which is a month-long celebration of science and STEM in North Carolina. We are so proud to be a partner event with the North Carolina Science Festival. Before we head into the garden, I just want to take a sneak peek real quick at some of the things that we will get to see there. This is our planter box that we take into schools and helps with our environmental education program. We have a pitcher plant growing here. We have a sundew. And of course, we have the very famous Venus flytrap. Now this Venus flytrap is already flowering. It's a little bit ahead of some of the ones you'll see in the garden. Check out this beautiful flower that attracts pollinators. Okay, now come with me into the garden where we are going to explore and find these plants growing in nature. We're going to meet up with Kelsey, our AmeriCorps service member, who spends time teaching students like you about carnivorous plants and other environmental education topics. Hey Kelsey!
Hey everyone! Welcome to the Stanley Rehder Carnivorous Plant Garden, where there are 4 different types of carnivorous plants that can be found here in the garden. We're going to show you an up-close look at some of those plants in just a second, but a brief history on the Stanley Rehder Carnivorous Plant Garden is that this garden is named after a Wilmington native, Stanley Rehder. He was also known as the Flytrap Man. He worked tirelessly for the protection of carnivorous plants, and this garden is a legacy of his work. Does anyone know what carnivorous means? For those of you who may not be familiar with the term, it means meat eating, or in a carnivorous plant's case, insect eating. We got 3 different plants we're going to show you here today. We're going to look at the pitcher plant, the Venus flytrap, and the sundew. Let's join our Associate Director, Jessica, for a closer look at some of these plants.
Hi everyone! Welcome to the Stanley Rehder Carnivorous Plant Garden. Jessica here. And the first thing that you're going to notice as we look across the garden is a giant flytrap. This place right in the heart of Wilmington is a beautiful escape, even though it is in the urban landscape. There's a wonderful path that walks through this garden, and all along the path we'll be able to see carnivorous plants. So take a quick look at a section of the garden. And I think that you'll notice there's one plant right now that is standing out more than any other. It's a super easy plant to see. So we're going to come look at this plant up close. The first carnivorous plant we're going to talk about today is the pitcher plant. And bonus, there's a fly right on top of this guy. So this is a yellow pitcher plant, and they're called pitcher plants mostly because they actually have a pitcher. They trap their bugs in a pitcher. Now, this pitcher plant has a wonderful nectar along the rim that attracts bugs like this fly to it. And once the fly comes down and is attracted by the nectar, oh, that one might go in. It goes into this tube, and in this tube has some hairs that face downward,
And as the bug goes further and further down, it's making it harder and harder for it to get out. Eventually it gets to the bottom of the pitcher and it is digested by a pool of digestive juices down there. It drowns and is slowly dissolved into the plant where it takes the nutrients. After it's dissolved, because it's stuck in this pitcher, there's going to be exoskeletons that are in there, and we'll get an up-close look at that later. Now the other thing that we're looking at right here is the flower of this yellow pitcher plant. So because it's already in the middle of spring, the pitchers are now taller than the flower. However, this comes up before the pitchers and it shoots up much higher so that pollination can occur and that the pitchers aren't trying to eat the bugs that are pollinating the plants. Now in the garden, there are a variety of pitcher plants, not just this yellow one that's most noticeable. And as we wander through, if we see some, I'll point some differences out to you. But they do come in red and variations. Some have white fringe on top. There's a lot of fun pitcher plants to see in this garden. Now let's take a little stroll deeper in along the fun path, and then the next plant we're going to see is always a favorite, the Venus flytrap. Now the Venus flytrap only grows in a 100-mile radius of where we're standing right here in this carnivorous plant garden. And once you notice a Venus flytrap on your walk here, then you'll start to see them everywhere. We have Venus flytraps all over the garden. And they do come in some color variations, but a lot of times you'll see a red inside and a green outside, and some have more red than others. Like Stephanie was saying about the flower, the Venus flytrap, just like the pitcher plant, shoots up a giant flower stalk that is much taller than its actual traps below. This flower stalk comes up very high so that when the flower opens, pollination can occur without the traps eating the insects. The next thing that we're going to look at is actually how these flytraps eat insects. This is a trap mechanism, and each one of these leaves has two sides, and inside the trap there's 3 trigger hairs on each side. When an insect lands inside the trap, it knocks the trigger hair. If it hits a second trigger hair in a 20-second time period, then it signals the trap to close, and it shuts over the insect. It releases digestive juices, and in about a week, it slowly dissolves the insect and absorbs the nutrients. After a week or two, that trap will open back up, and it can open and close anywhere from 5 to 8 times average, and then eventually that trap will die and fall off. So that's why the fly trap has multiple traps on it. And it's an important moment right here to talk about why, when we see fly traps in nature or at the carnivorous plant garden, that we don't touch them and trigger that, because when it does, it closes for a whole week and you've robbed that leaf of the ability to trap its own food. Now, just looking in this area, I can see other carnivorous plants as well. Obviously, the very noticeable pitcher plants, but one of the smaller and more unnoticeable ones that we'll see is also super fun right here. Here we have a pink sundew, which is a small carnivorous plant. Look at how small it is next to my hand. And it has spoon-like leaves, and on the end of those leaves are tiny hairs that have little dewdrops of digestive juices right on them. When a small insect goes, it gets stuck. Those are very sticky. And the spoon sort of curls in, and it digests the small insect right then. And then eventually, as it absorbs the nutrients, the exoskeleton blow away. Now this one's a fun plant to look at, mostly because we're lucky to see that it has a flower stalk as well. And as you'll notice, this flower stalk is high above, so it's not going to kill its pollinators. And now that you've noticed one, you're going to see another, and another, and another, and they're every single place. As we look at this really fun garden, just right here in this area, you can see traps that are low to the ground, traps that are high up. And if we come over here and there's fly traps everywhere, we can see another different type of pitcher plant. There's a tiny one right here, pitcher plants popping up right there, Everywhere you look, there's carnivores. I do want to take you over to see a different sundew. One of my favorite carnivores is this sundew, different than the pink one we just saw. It has tall tentacles that grow up, but it does catch the insects in much the same way. It has the little hair and the digestive juices. Right, well, take one more quick look around right here and see all the different carnivorous plants that you can see. There's some flytraps shooting up with not as much red. Let's take a walk back towards Kelsey and see what other ones. Oh, here's one. Different than the yellow, you can see the different colors here. It has the white fringe top that hasn't opened yet and a red flower. All right, hey Kelsey, I hope you enjoyed that little trip down and realize that now as we walk, every single step we take, we're seeing some sort of carnivorous plant here at the garden.
Yeah, those are super neat. Thanks for showing those up-close views of some of the pitcher plants and other things. So I have some questions for you, Jess. What makes the ecosystem here ideal for carnivorous plants to grow?
That's a fun question, and I love the word ideal because what makes it ideal for carnivorous plants is that it's not an ideal ecosystem for most plants to grow. The soil here is lacking in some nutrients. And so because the nutrients aren't here available in the soil, the carnivorous plants have had to adapt in a way that they can get nutrients elsewhere. And since we live here in Wilmington and we have sunshine a lot of the year, it's warm, it means we have a lot of insects. One of the things that was readily available to plants is insects. So they have adapted to take something that's readily available and turn it into nutrients.
We certainly do have a ton of insects here in Wilmington. So I've also heard that carnivorous plants need fire in order to thrive. Do you think you could explain this a little bit more for us?
I could do an entire video on that actually. But yes, so like I said, with the nutrient poor soils, one of the other things here on the coastal plain is that fire would have been very naturally and frequently occurring in this ecosystem before people lived here. And so they've had to adapt to that as well. And fire that would have happened from a lightning strike or other reasons would have burned the areas in these longleaf pine ecosystems. So you can look around and see some of the trees that we're seeing here are longleaf pines. And longleaf pines are fire tolerant, and so are these plants here. So a lightning would strike, fire would happen, and what that does in this process is basically knock out all of these woody species and a lot of the other competitive plants that would grow here. So if you don't have fire, things like this grow up, and if you imagine this like a flytrap growing here, it would not be able to grow, eventually be choked out, because I think I didn't talk about earlier, but all of these plants still do photosynthesis, and so their energy is still coming from sunlight, and if they're being outcompeted by woody species, they are not able to see the sun. You know, like I said, the flytrap only grows within a 100-mile radius here, so we find that we're really attached to this very special and unique plant.
Definitely, it's a unique species to have. Thank you for sharing those really interesting, fun facts. Let's go over to our craft table where we can check out some easy activities you can do while you're sitting at home.
Oh, hey, great news! I want to show you guys one thing on our way to the craft table. I know we said we were only going to show you 3 carnivorous plants, but today's a great and lucky day. We have a 4th, the bladderwort, and look how tiny this guy is. So the only way I ever find these in the garden is when they're flowering, because you can see the stem, and their trap is a bladder that's underneath the soil and catches very small microscopic insects and larvae. Great, well, a bonus flower today, a bonus plant, but let's head with Kelsey over to the craft table.
So are you looking for something fun to do while you're sitting at your house? Well, we got a really easy craft for you to do with things that are probably just sitting right in your kitchen right now. All you'll need are 2 red and green crayons, a paper plate, and some scissors, which you might need some adult supervision to use. First step is you'll want to color one side of the plate red for the inside of the Venus flytrap. The second step is you'll color the other side of the plate green for the outside of the trap. After you color them, you'll want to fold it in half and use your scissors to cut out small triangles around the rim of the plate. You can then fold these teeth inward, making the trap, and there you got your Venus flytrap. We have the downloadable instructions for this activity on our Coastal Land Trust page, as well as another educational video to go along with that. After doing that craft, if you think you want to do some more activities, we've got a more involved Venus flytrap craft. This one's going to involve some more materials than the one we just showed you, but we also have the instructions for this one available online as well.
Kelsey, can you do one of my favorite things ever? Can you show us what that pitcher plant ate for lunch last year?
Oh, I would love to. So,
So cool.
so do you wonder what happens to the insects after they are fully digested by the carnivorous plant? In the case of a Venus flytrap or a sundew, after the plant has fully digested the nutrients from the insect, what's left is the exoskeleton, which gets blown away by the wind, freeing up space for the next meal. However, for a pitcher plant, the bugs remain at the bottom of the tube, digested. So if you want to come get an up-close look of our pitcher plant, let's see if we can identify what it might have had for dinner last year. Wow. So oh my gosh, you can see these just blow right away in the wind. That's because these are just the exoskeleton, aka the shells of the insects. This pitcher plant has something a little more interesting in it, if you can see that at all. This is a ladybug shell. So it is almost time for us to wrap up today, but before we end, I want to ask Jessica a few more questions as to why Venus flytraps are so special and what you can do to help protect them. Hey again, Jessica. So do you think you could tell us why flytraps are a vulnerable species?
Sure. Flytraps are a vulnerable and threatened species because, as we talked about earlier, they have a very small distribution area, 100-mile radius of where we're standing in Wilmington. So they already are limited in population by geography. Now, because we live in Wilmington and loss of habitat has an impact on them, people have been developing, because it's a lovely place to live, which reduces that habitat even more. So loss of habitat is a threat, as is fire suppression. We talked about why fire was important earlier, and if the fire is suppressed and we're not continuing to have fire in its ecosystem, it will eventually choke out those flytraps. So habitat loss, fire suppression, and lastly, unfortunately, poaching. Poaching is a threat to flytraps. So people do steal flytraps and then try to sell them in various markets. And so that is something that does have an impact on the population of flytraps.
Wow. Well, do you think you could tell us what are some things that our viewers can do to help protect these plants?
Sure. I mean, sitting at home, there's still a couple of things that you can do, even if you don't live here in Wilmington, North Carolina. One, if you are going to buy a flytrap because they are super cool and you wanted one, you need to make sure that you're getting them from a reputable place that grows them in greenhouses so that you're not contributing to buying stolen plants. We do buy our plants from Transplanted Garden. You heard earlier, they're one of our sponsors, and we know that their flytraps are cloned and grown in a greenhouse, so we try to support that good market. And the other thing that you can do is support places like the Coastal Land Trust that do protect the habitat of the flytrap. So there are things that you can do, and right now we have an exciting way to support the Coastal Land Trust. Stephanie's going to tell you about it.
Yes, right now we are in the middle of our Spring Match Challenge. A very generous board member has pledged up to $10,000 for online gifts to match every online gift up to $10,000 between last week on Earth Day and next week on Giving Tuesday now. So it's an awesome opportunity for you to double your impact with a gift to the Coastal Land Trust right now. Go online to coastallandtrust.org/match and you can get your donation matched dollar for dollar.
Thanks for sharing and thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this video